There were a few things that I couldn't cover in the first part of the shading video. Here I'll be going over those and also give an example of how I render a drawing from start to finish. One disclaimer, guys, light is really fucking difficult and complex and has levels to it, and it's really not my strongest side. I'll just be teaching you what I can understand of it as a self-taught artist, so be wary of that. Let's start with ambient light and with that ambient occlusion. Ambient light is the general light in the room aside from all the other light sources, and it hits the object from all directions. So what does it do? If you're not a child like me that doesn't know color, it would basically affect how you're gonna pick your colors. But, well, for us in this case though, what's important is the lack of ambient light, also known as ambient occlusion. Even though ambient light comes in from all directions, it's still not gonna be able to hit some part of the object. Usually parts where two objects are really close to each other, and it's gonna be darker than the rest of the shadow area. It's not very effective on a simple object like this, but you'll see that it can add a lot to more complex things. Ambient occlusion is pretty easy since it's usually always gonna be in the same places. The main ones are under the neck, under or in between the breasts if they're big enough, under the armpits, around the crotch where the legs and the hips meet, the parts where the hands are touching the body, and the parts where the hair is touching the face. Also in between the hair itself. These are the most obvious places. On top of this, it could happen on other connection parts as well. These are more of a stylistic choice to sort of fill the drawing more, since these places wouldn't really be in this dark of a shadow in real life. We can add on to this more with line art. We're basically going to thicken the lines at the places that have ambient occlusion. You can do this without marking the ambient occlusion as well, by the way. Ambient light is a separate light source from all the other light sources, so you can always shade onto this with another light source as well. Next up, bounce light or reflected light. When light hits an object, it doesn't stop there. It keeps bouncing around the area. So let's look at our faithful sphere again. We know this part. Light comes, it hits on some areas and doesn't hit other areas. But light keeps bouncing around the room or the area, eventually bouncing from the surface and hitting the shadow side of the object, illuminating it at least a little. This is called bounce light. The thing is, how we're gonna mark it is the same way as how we would mark shadows. It's just gonna be wrapping around the form inside the shadow side. The color of the bounce light would be based on the color of the light source, the environment, and also the surface that it bounces from. I know nothing about color theory, so I usually just go with a white color on an add layer under the shadow layer, and I adjust the opacity accordingly. There's probably other ways to do this as well, it's just gonna be slightly lighter than the tone of the shadow layer. A common color choice could be blue for the sky or green for grass, I guess. This way of portraying the bounce light usually works better on reflective surfaces, so it doesn't look that good in this case. There are two better ways to show it. For the first one, select all of the shadow layer. You can do this using the magic wand on Ibis Paint. Make sure that it's targeting the current layer that you're on. You can't use clipping layers for this, so it has to be like this. After selecting it, then open a normal layer on top of the shadow layer. Pick a soft airbrush, pick your desired color, I'm going with blue here, and start marking the bounce light. You can adjust the opacity to your desire as well. For the second way, this time open another multiply layer on top of the shadow layer and make it clip onto the shadow layer. And mark the edges of the shadows. The logic behind this is, so here's the object. From this side the light hits, and from this side the bounce light hits. This means the darkest side of this area should be the middle, because both of the two sides have some light hitting on it. So you're basically portraying the bounce light by portraying the lack of it. In real life it wouldn't be exactly on the edge, but it makes more sense in stylized shadings like this. Rim light. This is a pretty strong light hitting the object from the back, illuminating the edges of it. Applying it is pretty simple. Just pick a light color that's gonna work with the rest of the colors. I always just go with white. And mark the edges of the object. Make sure to keep the form in mind still. This will also be as bright, if not more bright, than the highlight. This is also why they may look really similar to each other, where I sometimes confuse the two, but I'll get to highlight in a second. You can apply rim light to pretty much any surface or object, and onto anywhere, whether it's the shadow side or the light side, since its main purpose is to make the subject pop. Highlights. Surprisingly, this was the hardest part of light and shadow, for me at least, since highlights have a lot of theory going into them, but I don't fucking care about any of that honestly. All you really need to know about them is they're gonna be near the center of the light area of the object. And if they're also near an edge, they're gonna start wrapping onto it. I'll showcase this in a second. This is kind of it. What shape you're gonna make them is completely up to you. They could be this ellipse or an empty ellipse like this, or these triangle or diamond shapes created through the lasso tool. You can add an extra glow to your highlights using layer modes on most digital drawing apps. On Ibis Paint, it's gonna be on the Effects tab. Create a layer under your highlight and find the glow filter on the Effects tab. You can also add your glow manually as well. This is a bit harder to get right, but gives you more control, I guess. You can also adjust the opacity of your highlights as well. Now, let me quickly showcase all of this by adding highlights to this reflective outfit. So, we have our shadows. The bounce light, very prominent since the object is reflective, and also the rim light. If you wanna know how to place the shadows, go check part 1. To understand where we're going to add the highlights, we have to understand the form and segments of this body, since the highlight is going to be located at around the center of the light area of these parts. The parts of the boobs that are being covered by the outfit, the two sides of the ribcage, the belly area, and the sides of the torso. By the way, you should kinda know these to place the regular shadows and the bounce light as well anyways. So yeah, I'm gonna pick a white color and use the lasso tool to add the highlights to these segments. You can add them using a regular brush as well. I just really like the aesthetic the lasso tool gives. Now, I'm also going to add the glow. And this is it. This approach basically works for most things, except hair. The highlights work a bit differently on hair. Again, we first have to think about the separate hair segments or parts. Now, add our highlights. The first thing you may notice is how they look like they wrap around the head. This mostly happens on straight hair like this. Also notice how as they reach the ends of each segment, they start to get wider and wrap onto the edges. So they start big and get smaller to the middle of the form and then big again when reaching the edges. Also notice how they're sort of scattered looking. This is because the individual hair strands sort of break the shape of the highlights. Aside from hair, I guess this could happen on any reflective outfit that also has a lot of folds on it. The general thing about highlights is they're very open to stylization, guys. Most artists have their own interpretation of them. You can just not add them at all or only add them to places that you want to emphasize. As explained before, you can play around with their shape and opacity as well. My advice would be to observe drawings of artists you like the rendering style of and see how they handle this. One last tip about rendering. When picking shadow colors, I mostly showcased it as using a tone of gray on a multiply layer. But you can pick your shadow color manually as well, especially when shading the skin. This is something that requires a good amount of color knowledge, so I'll definitely go over this again once I kinda learn those stuff. But for now, I just eyedrop the skin color and make it a bit darker and a bit more red. I also like to sort of go over the shadow layer one more time. This isn't any particular kind of light or shadow, I'm just making the shadow sides darker. You can do the same for the light sides as well, where you lighten it a bit. I'll be showcasing this on the demo as well. Another thing I sometimes do is to lower the opacity of my brush by a lot when coloring and shading, which gives the drawing this painterly vibe. There are probably better ways to do this too, so I don't know. One last thing you can do is to change the color of your line art based on the colors on the drawing. Here, I'll color pick my light area, darken it by a lot this time, open a clipping layer on top of the line art layer, and color the line art. Same for the shadow side, or you can leave it black as well. You can also do the same thing, but instead make it based on which lines are a part of the silhouette and which are not. But I'll showcase that on the end. The way I want you to think about this tutorial is me giving you a bunch of equipment. And from these equipments, you can pick and choose which ones you want to use or not use. I'll end this video with a full rendering of a drawing of mine. Normally I never do this clean of a line art, so consider yourself lucky to witness this. Let's start with the ambient occlusion. I'm gonna add the shadows for demonstration, but then hide it later on. After that, now let's thicken the line art. Next up, the shadows. The light will be coming from top right. I'm gonna be picking the colors manually in this case. Also gonna lower the opacity of the brush, as I mentioned. Notice how the shadows are wrapping around the muscles. Check the part 1 if you're having problems with this. Decided to make the shadows a bit darker so they're more readable. You can always adjust things, obviously. Let's add the second shadows. This is one of the reasons why I don't like to add the ambient occlusion as shadows, because these secondary shadows I mark kinda look really similar and work in similar ways anyways. Now, onto the highlights. Not gonna be adding bounce light. It doesn't really matter if you use an add layer or a normal layer for the highlights, I think, since we're using a white color anyways. But I don't know, try it out. Gonna lower the opacity to my taste. Brighten the light areas on the outfit. Same thing as we did on the shadows, but this time we're gonna lighten the color a bit instead. The hair is already pretty light, so it doesn't need it. And add the rim light. I decided it should be coming from the light side. Now, let's change the color of the line art. Gonna open a clipping layer on top of the line art and mark all the lines that are sort of inside the frame of the body, with a darker version of the skin. Wasn't very happy with the color, so I played around with it a bit. Now, let me add the cast shadows that I definitely didn't forget to add. I'm sorry if you are following along. One from the head to the shoulders and one from the torso to the left arm. The right arm also should be casting a shadow, but I don't care. I'm adding this because the last thing I sort of do is to add these lines onto the areas that are hit by the cast shadows. And that's my rendering process. I repeat one last time, from all these things I've demonstrated, pick the ones that you think would work for your style and incorporate them into your process. That's gonna be it for this video. I hope this was helpful. Thank you for watching till the end. Have a nice day.